Answer, but nobody wants to talk. Tell us
All right, Tammy, you want to say a prayer? Oh, okay. Oh, you want me to read first?
Yes.
Oh, shucks. Okay. When Jesus had, better pick it up. When Jesus had spoken these words, he went forth with his disciples over the ravine of the Kidron, where there was a garden in which he entered with his disciples. Now Judas also, who was betraying him, knew the place, for Jesus had often met there with his disciples. Judas then, having received the Roman cohort and officers from the chief priests and the Pharisees, came there with lanterns and torches and weapons. So Jesus, knowing all things that were coming upon him, went forth and said to them, "Whom do you seek?" They answered him, "Jesus the Nazarene." He said to them, "I am he." And Judas also, who was betraying him, was standing with them. So when he said to them, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground. Therefore he again asked them, "Whom do you seek?" And they said, "Jesus the Nazarene." Jesus answered, "I told you that I am he. So if you seek me, let these go their way." To fulfill the words which he spoke, "Of those whom you have given me, I have lost none." Simon Peter then, having a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's slave and cut off his right ear. And the slave's name was Malchus. So Jesus said to Peter, "Put the sword into the sheath. The cup which the Father has given me, shall I not drink it?" So the Roman cohort and the commander and the officers of the Jews arrested Jesus and bound him and led him to Annas. First, for he was father-in-law to Caiaphas, who was high priest that year. Now Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Jews that it was expedient for one man to die on behalf of the people. Simon Peter was following Jesus, and so was another disciple. Now that the disciple was known to the high priest, and entered with Jesus into the court of the high priest. But Peter was standing at the door outside. So the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out and spoke to the doorkeeper and brought Peter in. Then the slave girl who kept the door said to Peter, "You are not also one of this man's disciples, are you?" He said, "I am not." Now the slaves and the officers were standing there, having made a charcoal fire, for it was cold. They were warming themselves, and Peter was also with them, standing and warming himself. The high priest then questioned Jesus about his disciples and about his teaching. Jesus had answered, "I have spoken openly to the world. I always taught in synagogues and in a temple. There all the Jews came together, and I spoke nothing in secret. Why do you question me? Question those who have heard what I spoke to them. They know what I said." When he had said this, one of the officers standing nearby struck Jesus, saying, "Is that the way you answer the high priest?" Jesus answered, "If I have spoken wrongly, testify of the wrong. But if rightly, why do you strike me?" So Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. Now Simon Peter was standing and warming himself. So they said to him, You are not also one of his disciples, are you?" He denied it and said, "I am not." One of the slaves of the high priest, being a relative of the one whose ear Peter cut off, said, "Did I not see you in the garden with him?" And Peter then again denied it again, and immediately a rooster crowed. Then they led Jesus from Caiaphas into the Praetorium, and it was early, and they themselves did not enter into the Praetorium, so that they would not be defiled but might eat the Passover. Therefore Pilate went out to them and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" They answered and said to him, "If this man were not an evildoer, we would not have delivered him to you." So Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and judge him according to your law." The Jews said to him, "We are not permitted to put anyone to death." To fulfill the word of Jesus which he spoke, signifying by what kind of death he was about to die. Therefore Pilate entered again into the Praetorium and summoned Jesus and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Are you saying this on your own initiative, or did others tell you about me?" Pilate answered, "I am not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priests delivered you to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then my servants would be fighting so that I would not be handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not of this realm." Therefore Pilate said to him, "So you are king?" Jesus answered, "You are correctly that I am king. For this I have been born, and for this I have come into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who is the truth hears my voice." Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" And when he had said this, he went out again to the Jews and said to them, "I find no guilt in him, but you have a custom that I release someone for you at Passover. Do you wish then that I release for you the king of the Jews?" So they cried out again, "Not this man, but Barabbas." Now Barabbas was a robber. That's it. And I thought Barabbas was a murderer, not a robber.
He was both. Thank you, Bob. Good morning. Okay, the last time we met, gosh, it was 6 weeks ago, I think, something like that, a long time ago. And we were in chapter 17, so I'm going to do a little recap of the end of chapter 17. So last time we met, Jesus was in the upper room with his 11 disciples at the Last Supper. He had just told them he would be leaving them. And when he had finished speaking, he looked up to heaven as if he was talking directly to his Father, as though no one but he and the Father were in that room together. And he prayed what has been called the high priestly prayer. The 11 men who were with him witnessed the encounter. Now, I believe that that night, the upper room served as the Holy of Holies did on the Day of Atonement. On the Day of Atonement, one day each year, the high priest went alone into the Holy of Holies, the inner sanctum of the temple, to intercede for Israel. And on that day, animal sacrifices would be offered for the forgiveness of the nation. But tonight, in the upper room, the one and the only great high priest allows a witness of 11 men to see and hear his interaction with the Father as he prays the high priestly prayer. There had been many high priests that had come and gone over the years, but there was only one great high priest, Jesus the Christ, who had never set foot in the Holy of Holies in the temple, but made this chamber his own Holy of Holies. This sacred moment is in a sacred space, and Jesus interceded for those who were present at the supper and those followers who were to come in the future. This moment in that upper chamber was the one true Day of Atonement in the history of the Jews. And Jesus would be the sacrificial lamb the following day, putting an end to the need for animal sacrifice, because Jesus was the one and the true, unblemished Lamb of God. In his prayer, Jesus asked his Father for protection for those he was leaving behind. He also prayed for their unity. He wanted those who believed in him to be one with him as he and the Father were one. if his followers stayed in union with him, and if his followers stayed in union with one another as brothers in Christ, they would successfully carry out Jesus' mission on earth. It was a profound and touching moment. Now, I have a question. Have you ever experienced being in a place that you loved, but you found the experience lacking because you were alone? Have you ever been in a place that you loved, but you found the experience lacking because you were alone?
I'm sure I have.
You have?
I'm sure that I probably have. Been in a place and looked around and was alone, and I wish I wasn't. Maybe it was, at a cemetery,
Yeah.
or a parent.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I'm really sure if we think about it.
I'm sure we all have at one point, maybe not recalling it right now, but yeah. Well, Chuck was on assignment in Seattle years ago when he worked for Food for the Poor. He visited a place he dearly loved, Eby State Park, which was overlooked. It was on a high, high cliff, had a fort there, overlooked the Strait of Juan de Fuca. But he couldn't enjoy it that much. He called me and he said, if you were here, or if the girls were here with me, the experience would be totally different. But he was alone. You want to be with the one you love. So in this high priestly prayer, Jesus requests that the Father allow his friends to dwell with him in heaven. He wants to share the love that he and his Father have for one another. He wants his team on earth to be his neighbors in heaven. He couldn't imagine heaven without them. So that's where we left off in chapter 17. And then today Bob read chapter 18. So the men are still in the upper room, celebrating the Passover feast a day early. Judas had gone out to betray Jesus to the Jewish authorities. The meal's over, and it's dark outside. It's time for the men to leave. They head to the edge of town down a steep hill, about 100-foot drop into the Kidron Valley. In Hebrew, Kidron means dark, gloomy, confused. And as they cross the valley, they head to a garden below the Mount of Olives. There they would have a full moon tonight. Says Barclay, so there's plenty of light. Okay, but when you get a full moon and it's a dark night, there are plenty of shadows too. The 23rd Psalm talks about the shadow of death. And Jesus is certainly walking through the valley of the shadow of death as he heads towards Gethsemane. But shadows are just shadows, and he's just passing through. Passover is in the spring of the year. The Kidron Valley was a dry riverbed at that time of the year, and it sits below Jerusalem. And the temple sits on the top of a hill at the edge of the valley. Now, at the time of the Passover, well over 250,000 lambs were slain for the Passover sacrifice. And their blood would drain down the hill from the temple into this valley. So can you imagine Jesus and his disciples walking through this area at night? Can you imagine the stench of blood? Can you imagine the fear that Jesus was feeling? I wonder if Jesus isn't reciting the 23rd Psalm to himself as he crosses this valley in order to comfort himself. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restoreth my soul. Yea, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for thou art with me. And as they come out of the valley to the other side, they head to the Garden of Gethsemane, which is called the Olive Press Garden. It lay at the foot of the Mount of Olives. The disciples fall asleep among the olive trees. They're tired and they're cold and they're sad because Jesus has just shared with them that he's leaving. Judas knows this is a place that Jesus and his disciples often go to pray. And so he shows up with a band of men, Roman soldiers and officials from the chief priests and Pharisees. They come carrying torches and weapons. So how do you suppose Judas is feeling right now?
Maybe conflicted. I mean, he knows he's doing bad, but maybe he thinks he should do good.
Okay, conflicted, you say? Anything else?
Remorseful.
What's that?
Remorseful.
Remorseful? Okay. You don't think so?
No, not
What do you
when he
think?
kisses Jesus. When he kisses Jesus, then he realizes what happened.
You think so?
You know, Lincoln was just thinking of his money that he got.
Okay. So remorseful. What's that? Accomplished. Yeah. I think he feels all of what you said. I think he feels pretty important now, pretty powerful. He's leading a pack to show them where they can arrest Jesus. Okay? Judas was a zealot who wanted to overthrow the Romans by leading an army of insurrectionists. So he's got his army now. But the very people that he wanted to overthrow are part of that army. Not only has Judas betrayed Jesus, he's betrayed all Jews by leading Roman soldiers to arrest a Jewish man. He's played both sides of the fence, getting Romans and Jews to work together. What is that saying? The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Is my friend. Yeah. They've come to take away an unarmed, itinerant preacher who has no weapons and has done no wrong. So why do you suppose Judas has betrayed Jesus? We've talked about it before. There's a lot of speculation, but what do you think? Why do you suppose Judas has betrayed Jesus? What's that? What did you say before? I don't know. What did you say before?
I don't know, maybe his heart just wasn't where it should have been as the other disciples.
Okay.
In his commitment and his love for the Lord.
Okay.
He was still walking very much in the world in all of his life.
Okay. So he's still in the world, okay? Still in the world. He's a money man. Yep. Okay, there are several speculations about this. Some say Judas started out with good intentions but became sour when he couldn't manipulate Jesus over the years. And he was tired of Jesus being a pushover. And he was so disappointed that he turned his anger in anger against him. Judas wanted a politician. He didn't want a spiritual leader. Okay? And still others say Jesus was a bad actor from the start. He was a zealot and a thief. And some say he was in a band of assassins. The Encyclopedia Britannica states that Judas belonged to a group of zealots known as the Sicarii, a radical Jewish sect, some of whom were terrorists. Now, St. Matthew and St. John both describe Judas as greedy in their Gospels. And Jesus himself, just a few chapters before, describes Judas as a devil. When he says, "Did I not choose 12 of you, but one of you is the devil?" Okay, he didn't name him, but he said that.
It was all about Judas himself.
Yeah,
He was all about himself.
right,
And so,
right. Okay, in verse 5 of chapter 18 that Bob just read, it says, "And Judas, who betrayed him, stood with the band that came to arrest Jesus." Now, in standing with them, he clearly declares that his allegiance is not with Jesus, okay? Ultimately, only Judas knows why he betrayed Jesus. We know him as the son of perdition, or the one doomed to destruction. Now, when the group of soldiers enters the garden, Jesus moves forward and he asks the officers what they want. They don't approach him, he approaches them. Excuse me. It seems to me that he steps forward to protect his disciples. Okay? He doesn't want his men to tangle with the mob. The soldiers can take him, but they need to let the others go, as Jesus commands, "You came for me, let the others go." The scriptures declared that Jesus would not lose any of the men the Father had given to him, except the son of perdition. And Jesus proves this. by asking the torchbearers, "Whom do you seek?" Okay, so when the leaders answer Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus steps towards them and distances himself from his men. Jesus owns the ground. He confronts, he's not confronted. So when they ask him, when they speak to him, how does Jesus answer the group who's looking for him? What does he state? I am he. And the band drew back and fell to the ground when Jesus said, I am he. Now, William F. Howard, a writer for the Interpreter's Bible, says, and I quote, "The moral majesty of Jesus astonished the captors, who recoiled in amazement and fell to the ground." Pastor Tony Evans says, "The Greek words behind the translation, I am he, can be rendered I am. The divine name, the self-designation that God revealed to Moses. Jesus is no mere man. He is the Word who was with God, who was God, and became flesh. He spoke the divine name using the same voice that he had spoken the world into existence, and it knocked the betrayer and his accomplices off their feet." Barclay says it's not normal for armed men to fall away from an unarmed man. So if they fall back, they have met a superior force. So when a lower power meets a higher power, the lower power bows to it, okay? And that's what just happened. Chuck and I met Dorothy Cedars, a missionary from our hometown who lived in Africa in the 60s and 70s. And she told how she lived in a 2-room hut in Rwanda. She went to bed one night and she woke up to loud noises and thrashing sounds. A machete-wielding shaman had come to her hut to kill her. And she was terrified. And she prayed, "Lord, you brought me here. You're going to have to get me out of this mess." And she said the shaman could not get into her bedroom because it looked as though he was pressing his nose up against glass that wasn't there. Okay? So God protects the ones he loves. And Jesus was protecting his men as he tells this group of thugs to leave him alone. Now, Peter shows his bravery, and he's willing to defend Jesus to the death. He draws his sword and cuts off the ear of Malchus, the high priest's servant. Peter really meant it when he said that he promised to protect Jesus back in the upper room. Okay? Now, if Peter is so faithful that he attacks with his sword, why does Jesus rebuke him? Any ideas?
Well, it wasn't.
Deb's got one. Oh, I'm sorry.
It wasn't part of the. Sorry, Deb. It wasn't part of the prophecy. It wasn't part of Jesus' plan.
Mm-hmm. He's been rebuked before by Jesus, right?
Yes,
Remember?
Of course, maybe he didn't know that when Simon Peter starts wielding his sword, that it wasn't going to chop off his head. And Jesus said, "I have lost none."
And Jesus said what?
I have lost none.
I have lost none.
I have lost not one.
Okay.
He said.
Okay, yeah, Jesus doesn't, he's on his Father's mission. He doesn't want Peter to get in the way. Okay, he's been rebuked once before. Okay, and Jesus says to Peter, "Am I not to drink this cup the Father has given to me?" Jesus in his goodness heals Malchus, okay? Jesus in his goodness heals Malchus. Now you would think that this group would have second thoughts about arresting a healer, but this is their job and they're going to do it. And healing Malchus, Jesus isn't just showing compassion. He's also keeping Peter out of trouble with the authorities because Peter could have been arrested and thrown in jail. In stepping forward and dealing with Malchus, Jesus also keeps the soldiers distracted from all of his disciples who run away. Okay? When Jesus is abandoned, the soldiers bind him even though he does not resist and he has no weapon. I don't get the need for this group to be so brutish, but Maybe when a band of men full of testosterone gets together, they have to rough it up a bit so everyone knows they mean business. Now, verses 15 through 40. Jesus is dragged back to the Kidron Valley, this time being bound, probably with iron wrist cuffs. They actually had handcuffs back then. He's led back up the hill to the city. And they take Jesus to Annas' home first because Barclay suggests it was closer to the Garden of Gethsemane than Caiaphas' home. Though Caiaphas is the official high priest, Annas was the real power behind the high priest's office. Annas is Caiaphas' father-in-law, who had been high priest before his son-in-law had been given the position. So the Jews had always elected their own high priest before the Romans overthrew Israel. But once the Romans took over, they put puppets in place who would do their bidding. Annas had been removed and Caiaphas had replaced him. And this is not good because Annas has a bone to pick with Jesus. Okay? Annas was rich and influential. He made a killing by selling unblemished animals for sacrifice inside the temple courts. People would purchase lambs for sacrifice inside Jerusalem's city walls for a reasonable sum of money, but those lambs were often blemished. And so Annas opened up this thing called the Annas' Bazaar in the court of the Gentiles. And he sold spotless lambs when the blemished ones were rejected for sacrifice. He charged sometimes up to 20 times the amount he should have. He was a profiteer. This is a high priest. He's a profiteer. And he became enraged when Jesus overthrew the money changers' table because Jesus was cutting into his profits. So Jesus' appearance before Annas stirs Annas' anger. Okay? Now, John is allowed on the property because he knows Annas. Perhaps John is the man who sold fish to Annas' household. We don't know how he knows Annas, but he knows him. And he also works it so that the servant girl allows Peter inside the gate. John's in the gate because he knows Annas, but he gets Peter inside too. So the girl asks Peter if he's one of Jesus' followers, and he says no. Okay, that's the first denial. Peter's cold. So he stands with the servants and officials to warm himself by a charcoal fire. I imagine that Peter is also scared. So meanwhile, Jesus is questioned by Annas and then slapped by an official who thinks he's been disrespectful to the high priest. I imagine Peter and John, if they've witnessed that, want to protect Jesus, but they can't do anything. So after his interrogation, Jesus is sent off to Joseph Caiaphas, who also lives in Upper Jerusalem, the rich part of the city, and Peter and John follow. Caiaphas was a Sadducee who didn't believe in life after death. Sadducees do not get along with Pharisees who do believe in life after death. He's sad, you see. The Pharisees didn't like Caiaphas, and they referred to him as the monkey. But today, the Sadducees and the Pharisees worked together. Back in John chapter 11, at a council meeting of the Pharisees and high priests, Caiaphas, not knowing that he was prophesying, tells the people that it's better for one man to die than have the whole nation destroyed by the Romans. Okay? He wants to get rid of Jesus because Jesus threatens the authority of the Jewish leaders. And he also makes the Romans nervous because he's so popular with the crowds. Okay? So here he is, at Caiaphas's. And interestingly, the hill on which Caiaphas's house stood was called the Hill of Evil Counsel, according to the Catholic Encyclopedia. I think that's interesting. Now, Peter gets a bad rap for being cowardly because he denied Jesus, but in reality, he's not. He's not a coward. His life is on the line. Okay, when all the others have run away, it's just Peter and John who dare to follow Jesus. And Peter is more at risk than John because John knows the high priest Annas, and he may also have known the high priest Caiaphas because he is led into Caiaphas' courtyard too. Okay? So those who are supposed to abide by the law as religious leaders step on the law. They bind a man who has no weapons. They condemn a man without witnesses, which is against the 9th commandment. A guard strikes a blow to a man who tells the truth. So they violate what they are bound by duty to keep. It's cold as Peter warms his hands near the fire. It's about the middle of the month of April, the month of Nisan. It's dark outside. And Peter must be perplexed by everything just about now, saying to himself, why am I here? What is my place? What am I to do? I can't protect Jesus. He won't allow me. Though Peter was brave, I imagine he was deathly afraid, and he feels terrified and helpless. And Jesus, the one and only great high priest, lived in poverty. And here he stands before the sham of a high priest, Caiaphas, who lives in wealth. That's pretty ironic. So a second time, Peter is asked if he's one of Jesus' disciples, and he replies, I am not. And on the heels of that denial, Peter is asked again by a relative of Malchus, who saw Peter in the garden with Jesus. And Peter denies knowing Jesus a third time. He says, I don't know the man. And immediately the cock crows. And Peter replays the words of Jesus in his head. You will deny me 3 times before the cock crows. And he runs out of the courtyard and weeps bitterly. So what do you suppose Peter's thinking at this very moment? What is running through his head?
Disgusted with himself. Sorry.
Maybe he's feeling guilty.
Feeling guilty?
Disgust with himself that he couldn't stand by Jesus.
Okay.
He failed.
He failed.
He utterly failed. There was a prophecy that he would deny him 3 times, and I'm sure he thought, no, that's not going to happen.
He probably thought that'll never happen.
Yeah.
I wonder if he was thinking, I was going to die for him, and now I've denied him. He knew me better than I knew myself. He knew my weakness better than I knew my strength.
And Jesus picked him.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he knew. There wasn't anything that Jesus didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
He knew all those men that were with him.
Mm-hmm.
He knew them better than they knew themselves.
Then they knew themselves.
Peter,
Yeah.
realized.
So cocks crow early in the morning before day breaks to say, here I am, this is my territory. Kind of like Jesse Waters on TV. This is my, this is my world. Yeah. They also crow when a threat is around and they want to warn their harem of chickens. Okay? So the threat in this courtyard is the presence of demons trying to take Jesus down. There's a territorial dispute going on. Satan, who is considered the prince of this world, is trying to destroy the creator of the universe. Satan's kingdom will be taken away in short order, and he's putting up a fight as Jesus is condemned and Peter's heart is broken. So Jesus is led to the praetorium, it's a prison, at Pilate's headquarters, where he will be held before the governor will see him. Okay, he was probably in the same prison as Barabbas. The Jewish authorities marched Jesus to Pilate's residence, and they don't enter. But why don't they enter? What reason do they give?
I don't know quite where you are.
33.
That's where I was.
They don't want to defile themselves. Yeah, you're right. They don't want to defile themselves. They want to eat the Sabbath dinner, and they can't. Okay, I think that's ironic. They don't mind defiling themselves by torturing poor Jesus, right? But they do mind defiling themselves by being in Pilate's quarters. And they don't mind defiling themselves by making false charges and bearing false witness as they break the 9th commandment, and yet they claim themselves to be holy. Okay? They're following the Jewish law. Mm-hmm.
More important than spiritual law.
Absolutely. And yet they're lawbreakers. Yeah. So Pilate has insisted that a charge be brought forth, and the Jews are empty-handed. The best they can do is suggest that Jesus has claimed to be the Messiah, and so he's a blasphemer. Even though they've got nothing, they defend themselves, saying, well, we wouldn't have brought him to you if he wasn't a criminal. And Pilate is irritated with this group and tells them to do what in verse 31?
Take him yourselves and judge him according to your law.
Yeah, judge him by your own law. And then they reply, we can't put a man to death, but you can.
Well, which is a lie, because they stoned people.
There had been a recent change in the law that said they couldn't. I can't remember how many years prior to that. There really was something that said they couldn't do it. So here they've demanded the death penalty without one charge. If ever there was a kangaroo court, this is it. Okay? They don't give a hoot about the law. All they care about is killing Jesus. So Pilate calls for Jesus, asking, are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus replies, are you asking? Or is someone else put that in your head? And Pilate's irritated with Jesus. Pilate's not a Jew. All he knows is that the Jews have handed Jesus over, and he doesn't know why. Okay? So how does Jesus answer Pilate in verse 36?
My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then my servants would be fighting so that I would not be handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not of this realm.
Yeah. So he says, I am from a kingdom, but it's not of this world. Okay? I was born and came into this world to testify to the truth. And then Pilate asks, well, what is truth? He's looking right at truth, and he doesn't know it.
I have a note in my Bible. When in 38, Pilate said to him, what's a truth? And when Pilate said this, he went out again. He left. So he really didn't want to know what the truth was, because he wasn't been handling other things very well. So he didn't want to know the truth. He left. He was confused with various interpretations that were being given to him, reasons that were given to him. He didn't understand.
He didn't understand.
He's not a Jew.
So it looks to me like the only one who's in control at this moment is Jesus. He stands between a confused Pilate and a screaming crowd. Annas has nothing on him. Caiaphas has nothing on him. Pilate has nothing on him. The crowd has nothing on him. So this puts Pilate between a rock and a hard place. He wants to know what Jesus has done to get himself into this mess with the Jewish authorities. There's nothing wrong with Jesus, and Pilate knows it. And Mark says he suspects that people are just jealous of him. Okay? So in an attempt to grease the squeaky wheel and tone it down, Pilate attempts to assuage the unruly crowd, giving them a choice. They can have either Barabbas for their annual prisoner release, or they can have Jesus. And the crowd chooses Barabbas, a noted criminal and murderer. Stupid people do stupid things. Pilate could have offered a lesser criminal, but he offers a violent man who can do Rome harm, and he is the Roman governor. He doesn't need this guy out on the streets, okay? The crowd is stupid because they choose a murderer and a noted criminal as opposed to a man of peace who's a miracle worker, one who can do them good rather than harm. But this is happening, so the scriptures will be fulfilled. What a turn of events. 2 days earlier, the crowds waved palm branches and they hailed Jesus as the Messiah. Today, they wave taunts and threats. They are out for his life. What a fickle people. And the irony is that Jesus saves even Barabbas. Because if Jesus hadn't been condemned, Barabbas would never have walked free. Okay? So we finished chapter 19. We'll do 20 next week. Thank you.
No, we finished 18.
Hmm?
We finished 18.
We finished 18, we'll do 19 next week, yeah. And I apologize, I didn't pray after all today, but, okay, thank you.